nobody in the inner circle of President Vladimir Putin is said to have anticipated that the war would endure longer than a few months when Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Moscow is expected to face months more combat, military casualties, and the possibility of defeat when the weather turns winter once more and return to the frigid and muddy conditions that Russia's invading soldiers encountered at the beginning of the war. To learn more about the Russia-Ukraine war, continue watching the video. For more interesting content like this, subscribe to our channel War News Today and hit the bell icon to receive notifications whenever a new video is posted. According to Russian political analysts, this will be disastrous for Putin and the Kremlin as they staked all of Russia's financial resources on winning the conflict with Ukraine. They said that fear about the fate of the battle was growing in Moscow. In the wake of many humiliating losses for Russia on the battlefield, Putin has tried to put the failures behind him. Starting with the departure from the northern Ukrainian city of Kiev, next came the retreat of the Kharkiv in northeastern Ukraine, followed most recently by a portion of Kherson in southern Ukraine, an area where Putin declared to be forever Russian only 6 weeks before the pullback. Along with these pivotal moments in the war, Russia has also suffered minor but no less important setbacks, including attacks on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea, the retreat from Snake Island, and the Crimean bridge connecting the Russian mainland to the Ukrainian peninsula it acquired in 2014. Pro-Kremlin analysts and military bloggers have criticized Russia's military leadership for the string of losses, but most have been cautious to avoid explicitly criticizing Putin. This is risky since criticizing the war, or special military operation as the Kremlin refers, might result in imprisonment. According to a different Russian analyst, Putin is getting increasingly frantic not to lose the fight. As the war drags on, Putin has become more frail and vulnerable, and casualties increase. It's widely believed that the miscalculated Ukraine support level from the international community before the war even began. Although the real figure is difficult to verify given the disorganized manner in which casualties are recorded, Ukraine claims that more than 88,000 Russian forces have died since the conflict began on February 24th. On the other hand, Russia has sporadically publicized their estimate of Russian casualties, despite the fact that it is much lower. Over 6,000 Russian soldiers have died in Ukraine, according to the military minister of Russia in September. Russia has undoubtedly caused enormous damage and destruction, even if the war hasn't gone their way so far. It's thought that Putin's military leaders misled the president into thinking the conflict would end after a few weeks and that Ukraine would be easily overpowered. Millions of people have fled the nation due to the persistent shelling of several villages, towns, and cities, which has killed civilians and destroyed civilian infrastructure. For those who have remained, the current Russian tactic of heavily bombing the nation's energy infrastructure has resulted in harsh living circumstances, including regular power outages and widespread energy and water shortages as the temperatures drop. According to Alexei Reznikov, Ukraine's defense minister, Russia has attacked Ukraine with more than 16,000 missile assaults since the beginning of its invasion, 97% of which were intended for civilian targets. Although targeting civilian infrastructure such as homes, schools, and hospitals has been consistently denied by Russia, the country has admitted to purposely attacking energy infrastructure. Yet during the war, Russian missiles and drones have repeatedly attacked these structures, killing and injuring civilians. Political and military observers have speculated about what will transpire in Ukraine as winter approaches, wondering if they will witness one final assault before a stalemate settles in, or if the current attritional fights, with neither side making significant progress, will continue. A region of Ukraine, specifically the region around Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine, where heavy battles have been going on for weeks, has lately been compared to the Battle of Verdun in World War I, with Russian and Ukraine troops occupying flooded, boggy trenches and the scarred landscape evoking the conflict of the Western Front in France a century ago. Any attrition-based battle is unlikely to discourage Putin. It was never intended for President Vladimir V. Putin's war to be this bad. A tremendously self-assured Kremlin was in evidence when the head of the CIA visited Moscow last year to issue a warning against attacking Ukraine. Mr. Putin's national security advisor boasted that Russia's state-of-the-art military could repel even the Americans. Plans for the Russian invasion revealed that the army anticipated crossing Ukraine in a day or two after running hundreds of kilometers. In preparation for military parades in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, officers were instructed to pack their dress uniforms and medals. Before we move back on, subscribe to our channel for more interesting content just like this. Hit the bell icon to receive notifications whenever a new video is posted, and we'll get back onto the video. Investigations revealed a shocking series of errors that began while Mr. Putin was deeply alone during the pandemic, preoccupied with his legacy and convinced of his genius. These faults persisted even after recruited troops like Mikhail were used as tools of war. The failures were deeper than previously thought at every step. In interviews, Putin's allies said that he descended into anti-Western fervor and self-aggrandizement, which caused him to make the crucial decision to attack Ukraine almost entirely alone and without consulting specialists who thought the conflict was pointless. His numerous resentments and concerns were stoked by associates and hangers-on, creating a feedback cycle that one former confidant compared to the radicalizing effects of a social media algorithm. Before the tank started to advance, even some of the president's closest advisors were in the dark. Putin thought that his reasoning would be sufficient as described by another trusted ally. Despite Western perceptions of the Soviet military's might, it had been seriously undermined by years of theft. Under Mr. Putin, hundreds of billions of dollars were spent upgrading the military forces, but thousands of officers were implicated in corruption scandals. To deceive a group of senior brass, one military contractor reported hastily raising big patriotic banners to conceal the rundown circumstances at a significant Russian tank installation. Even access to the restrooms inside was denied to the guests. Fears about Mr. Putin's willingness to go as far as he can increase as he experiences more losses on the battlefield. He has decimated hospitals, schools, and apartment complexes while shutting off electricity and water to millions of people before winter in Ukraine. He has also devastated communities and targeted civilians for maximum suffering. The bombardment of Ukraine becomes worse every time Ukrainian forces defeat Russia decisively, and Mr. Putin has repeatedly emphasized to the world that he can pursue his vision of victory by using whatever is at his disposal, even nuclear weapons. Russia lost control of Ukraine after the invasion started due to several errors. Moscow fired its missiles using outdated maps and faulty intelligence, shocking the country's air defenses in Ukraine, which were still in place and prepared to protect them. In what some officials call the first significant test of cyber weapons in actual conflict, Russia's renowned hacking teams attempted to prevail but were unsuccessful. Surprised by the impending battle, several Russian troops called home on their smartphones, allowing the Ukrainians to track them down and kill them in great numbers. In addition, despite suffering significant casualties on the battlefield, Russia's armed forces were so stodgy and sclerotic that they failed to adapt. Several Soviet pilots flew as if there was no risk while their planes were being shot down, almost as if they were at an air show. Ukraine ought to have been completely engulfed. According to one report, in some early air confrontations, its fighter planes were outnumbered 15-1. In addition to having more modern aircrafts, Russia had pilots who could attack targets at greater ranges and with greater clarity. Russian defenses from the Soviet period should have been overwhelmed by the thousands of cruise and ballistic missiles that Moscow possessed. However, this assumption was held by American and Ukrainian intelligence officers, which led to forecasts that Ukraine would collapse within days. Ukraine thus shuffled the cards. Before the war started, it relocated several defenses, including its main radio intelligence command and control center and Buk and S-300 missile launchers, and this was all to different locations, top Ukrainian authorities claimed. Russian rockets frequently strike their previous targets instead. Up to 60% of Soviet cruise missiles failed to reach their objectives. Agility was one of Russia's issues. American officials claimed that even if Russian forces had spotted Alexei and his fellow pilots huddled together at their new rendezvous point, it would typically take the country's military 48 to 72 hours to update its intelligence and receive authorization to go after the new targets, by which time the Ukrainians would have left. The Russians were susceptible to attack because of their rigidity. Despite their failure, several Russian pilots maintained flight as though they had succeeded in destroying Ukraine's defenses. According to the Ukrainians, their ground attack planes frequently performed sorties without support from other fighter jets, allowing outclassed pilots like Alexei to ambush them by flying at low altitudes, hidden from radar, and roaring up from below to shoot them down. That will be all for today's video. If you like this video, then please give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. Also, express your valuable thoughts in the comment section below. Also, spend some time watching our other videos on our channel, but until then, goodbye.